Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the many works of Junji Ito as I explain every one of his stories. This video we're going to look at some more short stories in the Fragments of Horror collection and also one of Ito's longer stories and biggest hits, Hellstar Remina. A couple of notes. One, I only became aware that the Liminal Zone collection I covered last week has a part 2 which is meant to come out in March of 2025. Since I'll be done with this series by then, I will still cover the stories in that collection, but just independently. I should probably mention that not all of Junji Ito's stories have been published in English or in collections, so the last couple of videos in this series will be going through all of his works that never got an English translation, as well as any other oddballs. But anyway, you know the drill at this point. Let's just get into the video. This is every single Junji Ito manga explained, part 5. Okay, let's get into our next short story collection, Fragments of Horror, starting with Futon. This one's pretty short. A woman named Madoka describes her bizarre life with her husband Tomio. He stays cowering under his futon 24 hours a day because he's terrified of what he calls dark nature spirits that he sees floating around the room. At first he would at least leave the futon to go to the bathroom, but eventually he won't even do that and begins to wear diapers. His poor ass wife has to work all day and then come home to take care of him and clean his diapers and all that. Then one night, once Madoka has just about reached her breaking point, she suddenly looks up to see terrifying creatures floating around the room. Tomio points at a demon lady that seems to be in charge of everything, saying that it's all because of that woman. Apparently one night while Madoka was out, Tomio was randomly approached by a beautiful woman and they started a love affair. Turns out this lady is actually a witch and now she torments Tomio with these horrific spirits. Madoka just screams and runs. She returns a month later to find Tomio still cowering under the futon and the spirit's gone. She pulls on the futon only to find Tomio's dead body and a strange spongy substance covering him. After an investigation, it was found that the substance was a strange new form of mold with hallucinogenic effects, meaning that the woman and spirits must have just been hallucinations, and eventually Madoka started to be affected by the mold as well. The really mysterious thing here is, why did both Tomio and Madoka see the exact same vision at the same time? Wooden spirit. This is definitely the weirdest story in a while. It follows Megumi and her father who live in an old beautiful home. It's been selected as a registered national cultural property and is the father's love and joy. As they prepare the house for some upcoming tours, a tall woman knocks on the door. The woman is an architecture student named Minami. She's fascinated by the house and asks if she could have a look around. Megumi tells her to come back with an official group tour, but her father decides to let her in anyway. As they show Minami around, she seems to really like the house. She even says that she finds it very sexy and that it has a masculine strength. Okay, weirdo. Minami then boldly asks if she can stay at the house for a while. The father is reluctant at first, but eventually lets her stay. Megumi's pretty pissed off, but it turns out that Minami is actually pretty great. She makes them amazing meals, does the laundry, and cleans the house. She's so great, in fact, that Megumi thinks she'd make a great stepmom, and sure enough, her father and Minami tie the knot. After this, however, Megumi's father seems pretty down and talks about how the house seems to be changing somehow. Megumi goes looking for Minami and hears some strange noises coming from an upstairs bedroom. She peeks through the door to see something quite disturbing. Minami, fully nude and getting frisky with the house. She's essentially making love to the walls and floor. Definitely one of the most what the fuck things I've seen since starting these videos. Megumi lays in bed upset about the fact that her new stepmom is actually a freak when she hears a weird voice from somewhere in the house. As she walks through the house, she finds a strange stench in the air that she says smells like bad breath. She finds her father angrily scrubbing the floors, asking who would vandalize this beautiful property with graffiti, only this isn't graffiti. The house has come alive and is covered in eyeballs. It begins to rapidly transform into a mini-eyed monster and the two start looking around for Minami. Well, they find her. This creepy wooden bitch is clinging to the top of the house. Her face and body are transformed and she's just laughing. Megumi passes out and has a dream of her mother and some beautiful memories growing up in the house. Her and her father manage to escape and her father says that Minami lusted after the building and in the end the building lusted after her. The house has completely deformed and morphed into a strange hair-like material, and the final panel simply has Article 29 of the Law for Protection of Cultural Property, stating that when a cultural property has lost its value, it can lose its title. That's a pretty interesting way to end one of these. Next, we have Tomio, or the Red Turtleneck. So this story follows Tomio, the futon guy from the first story, but this must be some kind of separate timeline or something. You'll see what I mean in a minute. The story begins with Tomio standing in the street with his hands on his head and a look of absolute horror. He makes his way to his ex-girlfriend Madoka's apartment. She answers the door and Tomio apologizes to her and asks for help. Well, Madoka's not having it and she tells him to go back to that woman already. At this point, Tomio has tears streaming down his face and just starts screaming, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die." The story jumps back now 3 days earlier. Madoka is kicking Tomio out of her apartment because she's tired of his cheating. Once again, she tells him to go back to that woman. Tomio, possibly the biggest asshole on the planet, says, "Fine, she's way hotter and more glamorous than you anyway." There's another time jump as Madoka recalls meeting this mysterious woman. Apparently, the couple went to see a fortune teller for fun and Tomio instantly fell in love with her. They began a secret love affair, but this fortune teller chick is kind of weird. She talks about how much she loves Tomio's head, then even creepier, she says, "I want your severed head for my beautiful collection." Tomio assumes she's joking and laughs it off, but the woman pulls out one of her long hairs and wraps it around his neck, attempting to use it to cut his head off. He stops her, but the hair left a line on his neck. She gives him a turtleneck to cover it up and then says she wants to show him something. I don't get why Tomio didn't just bail as soon as she tried to strangle him with her hair, but whatever. She leads him to a dark hallway in her house, and as he gets a closer look, it becomes clear that the hall is filled with dozens of hanging severed heads, and the woman's eyes are now demonic. Tomio runs like hell from the woman, and after he gets out of the house, she yells after him, "You can't run," and laughs. Tomio stops in his tracks as he realizes he's being choked by the turtleneck. I guess the witch woman left a strand of hair in it. She says that her hair is stronger than steel, and it begins to slice through his neck, covering the turtleneck in blood. There's a large snapping sound as the witch declares his head is completely severed now, and that he must hold on to it with his hands, because if it falls, it's over for him. This brings us back to the present, where Tomio's situation is much scarier now that we know the backstory. Madoka doesn't believe him at first, but pulls down the sweater and sees his severed neck. She calls an ambulance while Tomio desperately struggles to hold his head on. At one point, he loses his balance and falls, pulling his head off, but he immediately puts it back on his neck and seems to still be fine. This is some messed up magic, man. Finally, someone comes to the door, only it's not the paramedics, but the witch woman. She approaches Tomio laughing and pulls out a death tarot card and starts sliding it into his neck. Madoka tries to attack her, but the woman says if she gets any closer, she'll knock Tomio's head off. This next part really made me squirm, I gotta admit. The woman pulls out a cockroach and lets it crawl into Tomio's neck. Man, that's gnarly. She laughs maniacally as the roach crawls around inside of his neck. Madoka takes the opportunity to stab her with a pair of scissors, which actually takes her down. Tomio mentions that he swallowed the cockroach and hopes that by killing the witch, the curse will be lifted. Just then, her corpse begins to dissolve, and 3 demon children rise out of it, shouting "Daddy" as they run towards Tomio. They pounce on him and rip his head off, but apparently this last part with the children was only a hallucination, as the two wake up to find Tomio's head reattached. However, the witch was not a hallucination, as her melted body still sits on the floor, and Tomio has the scar across his neck. The final panel shows Tomio still holding his hands to his head. Even though it's been reattached, the memory of the terror keeps him constantly holding on to it, and that is Tomio. Fun fact, Tomio was made into a feature film in 2011 and was actually directed by Junji Ito himself. Gentle Goodbye. This story follows Riko. Since she was a child, she has always had terrible nightmares about her father. Most of the time this involves her father dying, but sometimes she dreams that her father has become a toy. In this dream, she keeps her toy father in a drawer and forgets about him, only to find that he's gone off somewhere without her realizing. In the present, Riko has married into the wealthy Tokura family. Her husband, Makoto, went against his parents' wishes to marry Riko, and they give Riko the cold shoulder, except for Makoto's little sister Tomika, who's a kind little girl. Makoto introduces Riko to his great-grandparents, who were too old to attend the wedding, and there's something off about them. Riko keeps having nightmares about her father, and one night as she walks through the house, she sees a figure standing in the corner of her room. On a closer look, it seems to be the ghost of a very old woman. Riko freaks out and runs to the great-grandparents' room to tell them what she saw, but notices that they too appear to be ghosts. The next day, Makoto explains that it wasn't a ghost Riko saw, but just his great-great-grandmother. He says that she's 125 years old, and that along with his great-grandparents, she's what he calls an after-image. Apparently, the Tokuro family has an unusual tradition. When someone in the family passes away, the family uses concentrated prayer to summon them back to life. These are not spirits, but something they call an after-image that emulates the person who's died. These after-images last for 20 years, but slowly fade over time. time. This is why Makoto's grandparents have become translucent. It's an elaborate way for the family to let go of their loved ones over time and have the comfort of seeing them around the house after death. After learning this, Riko asks if the family could possibly help produce an afterimage of her father if and when he passes away, helping her cope with her fears of watching him die. The family dismisses her request and act cold as usual. Later, Tomika approaches a crying Riko and comforts her. However, Riko notices when looking closely at Tomika that she too is translucent. Makoto explains that yes, even his sister is an afterimage and that she died 10 years ago. We then see a heartbreaking sequence where Tomika is with her mother telling her she wants to stay here forever. Her mother begs her to never disappear as her tears pass right through Tomika's head. 8 years have passed and Riko is still ignored by her in-laws. One morning she chases after Makoto, who forgot his lunch, and notices him walking with a girl. That night she confronts him on the matter and he tells her not only is he seeing the girl, but he plans on marrying her. Riko becomes confused and belligerent. I mean, how could he marry this woman when he's already married to Riko? Makoto straight up slaps her and then hits her even harder with a big reveal. He says that 10 years ago, right before they were married, Riko was hit by a car and killed. He begged his father to create an afterimage of Riko, and because the situation was so sad, the family went ahead and did it. Riko is stunned, having a hard time coming to grips with the fact that she is an afterimage herself and will disappear in 10 years. The next day, she leaves the Tokura house. She says goodbye to Tomika, who has now almost completely vanished, and heads back to her father. She wonders who will go first, her or her father, and decides that despite all of her fears, she'll probably disappear first. In the final panel, Riko appears slightly translucent as she smiles and says, "Daddy, I'm home." And that is Gentle Goodbye. Next, we have Dissection-Chan. This story begins in the dissection room of a medical school. The students are about to begin learning the structure of the human body by dissecting cadavers. The class starts with a prayer for the noble people who donated their bodies to science and then unzip the body bags. One group finds that their cadaver is actually quite young and has color in her skin. One of the students, Tatsuro, thinks he might have actually seen her eye open. He touches her cheek and finds that her skin is still warm. Freaking out, he calls over the professor, who confirms that this woman is alive as he pokes her cheeks and she can't help but smile. She sits up saying, "How did you figure it out?" and then begs them to dissect her along with the other cadavers. This girl's a freak, man. She runs away fully nude when the professor says he's gonna call the cops. Everyone's freaked out, especially Tatsuro, because he actually recognizes the woman. He believes it's Ruriko, a girl he met when he was a kid. As children, Ruriko asks if Tatsuro wants to play doctor, since that's what he wants to be when he grows up. She says her stomach hurts and wants him to check it. Tatsuro has a real stethoscope he got from his dad, and Ruriko asks if he could get a scalpel as well. She convinces him to steal one from his dad's clinic, and later they meet in the woods. Ruriko brings a frog for the two of them to dissect. She asks Tatsuro to hold the frog steady while she cuts it open. I mean, look at the face this girl makes while she does it. What a creep. Well, the shock of seeing the frog's innards scars Tatsuro, and the frog gets away. Pretty sad considering its guts are hanging out. After this, Ruriko gets Tatsuro to continue dissecting animals with her, with him holding them down while she does the dirty act. Some kids start making fun of the two once they find out what they're doing, calling Ruriko Dissection-Chan and Tatsuro Dissection-kun. Ruriko approaches Tatsuro saying she wants to dissect something bigger like a dog or cat, and Tatsuro finally says he's done with this stuff and won't do it. She then says she'll dissect him instead, and he runs away. At the same time, Ruriko holds her stomach and says she's in serious pain. Back in the present, Tatsuro is walking home when Ruriko comes out from behind a tree and asks if he will dissect her. He books it back to his apartment, only to find that Ruriko is lying naked in his bed. She says she wants to apologize for when she was young, but that Tatsuro is terrible too, as he left her when her stomach really hurt. She explains that the rest of her childhood she suffered from severe stomachache, and that eventually she got tired of dissecting things and instead wants to be the one dissected. She revels in the idea of being dissected by her first love and says she doesn't care if she might die in the process. As she speaks, her stomach begins moving in a really unnatural way. In fact, it's swelling up and looks like something's moving inside. Pretty disturbing. Tatsuro runs away and later sees a news report about a woman who was dissected in a man's apartment. It seems Ruriko finally convinced someone to do it. The report said that the woman was rushed to the emergency room and escaped the hospital after she was treated. He wonders if she is finally satisfied having her stomach cut open, and after this, 20 years pass, with him never hearing from Ruriko again. Now Tatsuro is the one training the med students, and today they're practicing on cadavers. They open the body bags and find that one body is covered in scars. Of course, this is Ruriko. She really is dead this time, and she'll finally be truly dissected without interference. As the students cut into her, they find that her internal internal organs seemed to be made up of all kinds of disgusting things, almost like she was slowly being filled by the animals she dissected over the years. They scream in terror at the monstrosity, and in the final panel we see Ruriko's corpse with a smile on her face. Next we move into Blackbird. A man named Kume is birdwatching out in the forest when he suddenly finds a man collapsed on the ground and begging for help. Kume calls the police, and luckily the man gets to a hospital safely, although his legs are broken. The man's name is Shiro, and he had apparently been laying with his legs broken for a month. An officer asks what he did for food those 30 days, and Shiro claims he just rationed out the food he had in his backpack. Shiro asks Kume if he would please stay in the hospital with him overnight, obviously terrified of something. Kume obliges, and the two start to become friends. That night, Kume wakes up to a strange noise and looks over to see the silhouette of a woman with a strange face and large lips crouched over Shiro's body. She seems to be kissing him and smiles creepily before leaving the room. Shiro then spits out a chunk of chewed up meat. I guess this woman wasn't kissing Shiro, but spitting meat into his mouth. Shiro's freaking out, saying he doesn't need the meat anymore, yet she still came. At this point, Kume demands to know what the hell's going on, and Shiro begins his tale. About a week after he fell in the woods, on the brink of starvation and in terrible pain, Shiro was approached by the woman. She seems to be chewing something and spits it into Shiro's mouth. Shiro says the meat she pushed into his mouth tasted wonderful since he was starving. The woman simply laughed and left him, but she returned again. The second time, she spat blood into his mouth. After that, she returned daily, bringing him more meat and blood. Shiro is terrified at the fact that even now that he's been saved, the woman might continue to come, and he says the meat tastes disgusting now that he isn't starving. In fact, he says he really feels like he shouldn't be eating the meat, like something's off about it. Kume decides to stay with Shiro a bit longer, and the next night, the woman appears again, this time spitting an eyeball into Shiro's mouth. My god. She once again laughs and leaves the room, but this time Kume chases her outside, where she transforms into a giant black bird and flies away. After this, the woman didn't appear again. Shiro believes this bird woman thinks that he's her chick and she was feeding him like her baby. He says that when he was a baby, he was abandoned by his parents and left in a park. No one found him for a week or so, and it's a miracle he even survived. He thinks maybe the monster was feeding him then too. Some detectives come by and question the two men after the incident with the eyeball. They say that the eye and the meat belong to the same person, but they don't know who yet. The two are suspects in the murder, but the police have nothing to go on and let them go. Shiro decides to leave the city to escape the bad memories, and the new friends say goodbye. As Shiro leaves the station, Kume spots a large black bird following the train. A few years later, Shiro's corpse was found on the summit of Mount Fuji. They say that when the body was found, a huge black bird was pecking at the corpse, and we see an image of the bird plucking out one of his eyeballs. After investigating the body and doing a DNA test, it turns out that the meat that the bird tried to feed Shiro in the hospital actually matched his own DNA. Along with the body, Shiro's diary was found, where we get the last few entries before he died. The woman showed back up one day, and instead of feeding him, she took a bite out of his arm. He tried to run away, but the bird woman captured him and brought him to Mount Fuji. Every day, the woman would take another piece of Shiro's flesh. It appears that the meat Shiro was being fed in the woods was in fact his own flesh from the future. Whatever this creature is, it has the ability to time travel. The story ends as Kume is birdwatching in the woods when suddenly he sees the bird lady on a nearby tree branch. Startled, he loses his balance and tumbles off a cliff, breaking his leg. The woman descends upon him and begins feeding him a meat that Kume describes as having a very unpleasant taste, implying that he too is now cursed to eat his own future flesh. I gotta say, this might have been one of my favorite stories so far. It's a really cool concept. Magami Nanakuse. This story begins with a fangirl, Kaoru, talking about her favorite novelist, Magami Nanakuse. She's completely obsessed with the author's work. She explains that Magami's novels always feature characters with strange quirks and tics, and Kaoru can't help but act like these characters for a while after reading each book. Kaoru wants to be a writer as well, but hasn't had much luck. She reaches out to Magami in a fan letter, and to her surprise, Magami invites her to come hang out with her. She travels up into an isolated mountain village and is greeted by a creepy old woman who seems to be Magami's assistant or something. The old woman says it's too bad Kaoru came into this kusechi, which she describes as a place where disaster falls after entering it. It's an interesting term that I haven't really heard before. Kaoru asks the old woman if she's Magami's mother, and she seems a little offended, asking if she really looks that old. She says that she's actually a live-in student of Magami. They get to the house, and Kaoru finally meets Magami face to face, who turns out to be a man. Kaoru immediately goes into how excited she is to meet Magami, who straight up starts picking his nose in front of her. This next sequence is one of the most insane couple of pages I've seen since starting this series. Magami hits Kaoru with a barrage of insults, saying that she would never want to see Kaoru's writings and that she has no talent. She calls Kaoru a tick faker and flicks a booger onto Kaoru's face. Kaoru Kaoru immediately pisses her pants and falls to the floor crying. I mean, what the actual f am I reading here? Magami then invites Kaoru to his bar for a drink. He says he's collected only the quirkiest drinks over the years. He pours a couple of glasses of absinthe and Kaoru downs it immediately. Magami's like, don't get cocky, you're just a tick faker, but Kaoru continues to take the shots to the dome. She quotes a line from one of Magami's books where the main character says there are two types of people in this world, those with ticks and those without, and then demands that Magami say she has a tick. She rips off his wig and he confesses she has a bad drunk tick. Okay. Man, this is a weird one. Kaoru finally passes out and Magami tells the old lady to take her to the dungeon. Later, Magami attends a town party where all of the guests begin to copy all of his quirks, like cracking his knuckles, shaking his head from left to right, and sticking his tongue out all crazy. Meanwhile, Kaoru wakes up in the dungeon, which is filled with people exhibiting strange ticks. Magami enters saying that everyone locked up in here has developed strange ticks from the confinement, but none have lived up to his expectations. He thinks Kaoru has shown promise though, and hopefully will develop a really bizarre tick. And when she does, Magami plans on using her as inspiration for his next big novel. Kaoru then remains in captivity, desperately trying to stay still and not develop any ticks, but in doing so, she begins to feel her face stiffening up. Magami decides he needs to check in on her after she's been frozen in the same position for 3 days straight. He enters her cell and turns her around to see that her face has turned into a truly horrific sight. Her skin is disfigured and stretched out in all directions, and her body is completely stiff. Magami is psyched and declares this to be the ultimate tick. The story ends with Kaoru saying that she was donated to the town association hall. We can see her displayed in the background of the hall while everyone else is acting out bizarre ticks once again. What can I say? This was a really weird one. Okay, let's wrap up Fragments of Horror with Whispering Woman. This story follows Mayumi, a teenage girl who has a unique and unfortunate condition. She can't make any decisions for herself. She constantly asks herself hundreds of questions on what to do and can't even make the decision to move. Her father is a wealthy man and hires people to help his daughter make decisions in order to live a normal life. Unfortunately, the helpers never last more than a week, as Mayumi is extremely difficult to deal with, asking what she should do in the most specific ways. One day, a woman named Mitsu shows up for the position and manages to do a pretty good job with Mayumi. In fact, she's the best helper Mayumi's father has ever hired and does an exceptional job, lasting much longer than any other person. This is due to Mitsu's detailed and precise instructions that she whispers into Mayumi's ear consistently, leaving the girl no room for doubt. Mitsu does this 16 hours straight with no breaks, and the result is that Mayumi functions like a normal person. There is something strange about this woman though, like the fact that she often shows up with bruises all over her body. In fact, as the days go on, Mitsu is looking a little worse for the wear, like she hasn't been eating either. The father hires an investigator to figure out more about Mitsu and learns that she is in an abusive relationship with a man named Aga. He takes all of her money and regularly beats her. It seems Mitsu is living vicariously through Mayumi, giving her wise and accurate instructions, something she can't do for herself in her own life. Mayumi's father decides selfishly not to do anything about Mitsu's situation, as he's afraid if she wasn't with this horrible man, she wouldn't be as good of a helper for his daughter. 2 weeks later, Mitsu died. The autopsy found that she was brutally beaten to death, and her boyfriend Aga is now on the most wanted list. Mayumi's father is terrified of what this will mean for his daughter, but he finds that she seems to be functioning just fine. Mayumi says that Mitsu is still with her, whispering in her ear. Her father speculates whether this is a ghost or simply a delusion, but is happy either way that his daughter is doing well. However, one day he finds Mayumi with a knife stabbing the dirt as if she's practicing. And a few days later, she arrives home covered in blood, saying that she killed Aga just like Mitsu asked her to. And that concludes this story and the Fragments of Horror collection. So let's move into Remina. Sometimes called Hellstar Remina, this is one of my favorite Junji Ito mangas. Usually his works are concerning a single person experiencing the abnormal, or maybe sometimes a whole village, but Remina is an apocalyptic cosmic horror that throws the entire earth into turmoil. But enough preamble, let's just get into it. Remina starts off with a girl tied to a crucifix. The sky is filled with some nightmare entity looking down with evil eyes, and an angry mob screaming, "Kill Remina." As the devilish eyes in the sky gaze upon a dark earth, we're told it's July sometime in the future 21st century, the day of humanity's annihilation. Damn, that's one hell of a way to start this thing off. We then flash back 1 year into the past. We learn that a scientist named Oguro discovered a wormhole 30 years ago, and that today an unknown planet has traveled through it and into our universe. He explains to the press that he is currently tracking the planet's movements and that this is a groundbreaking discovery for astrophysics. One interviewer asks if he has named the discovered planet yet, and Professor Oguro replies that he has. In fact, he's named the planet Remina after his own beautiful daughter who's just had her 16th birthday. This is fitting as the planet is 16 light years from Earth, meaning that it also came into the universe 16 years ago. Back at Oguro's observatory, his colleagues find many strange things about the planet. For instance, wherever it moves, the stars around it seem to disappear. In the meantime, Oguro's daughter, Remina, has become quite a celebrity. She's a bit resentful of her name and the sudden thrust into stardom, but a talent agent, Yasumi Mitsumura, convinces her to embrace her celebrity status. After she signs with the agency, she becomes bigger than ever, quickly becoming the most famous person in the world. She has an official fan club and does a commercial for a construction company. She goes to a dinner to meet the head of the construction company, Mr. Mineshi, and his family, including his son Kunihiro. Kunihiro shows Remina around the family's vast mansion. This family is clearly loaded. They even have a huge bomb shelter hidden underneath the house. Kunihiro mentions that it can hold 4 people, including Remina. Kind of a weird comment. He also mentions that he has an older brother who wanted to be an astronaut, but his father was against it, and so he moved out 10 years ago, never to be heard from again. I know this all seems like random information, but it ends up being very important later on. Back at the observatory, Professor Oguro's assistant is freaking out. Yesterday, he noticed that the planet Remina stopped moving and began heading straight towards our solar system. He also explains that since the monitors are showing Remina 16 light years away, they're seeing the planet 16 years ago, which is when it started moving, and as it's moving at the speed of light, it's now within the solar system. Long story short, it's fast approaching Earth and should arrive any time now. The assistant says he's seen Remina's eye and starts laughing hysterically like a madman. The media somehow finds out what's going on, and there begins a small panic with people worrying what will happen when Remina arrives. I should mention at this point that this story does seem to take place quite a bit in the future, as there are flying cars zooming around the city. For the most part, it feels pretty modern, but there's a couple of futuristic elements like that. Remina's agent throws her a birthday party, and she meets the president of her official fan club, Noya Goda. He's a little creepy, as he straight up says he'll love her forever. Kunihiro is also there, and him and Goda get into a bit of a spat. Then suddenly Remina is hit in the head with an egg, although they can't find the culprit. As she cleans up in her room, an emergency broadcast starts playing, saying that Remina is making its way towards Earth, and that Pluto and Neptune have disappeared, followed by Saturn. At this point, all hell breaks loose, as everyone begins freaking out, and the government sends drones to tell people to return to their homes. In the crowd, one man starts talking about how weird it is that Remina suddenly decided to head toward Earth. He mentions that it was Professor Oguro who first discovered the planet, then named his daughter after it, and she quickly became a huge star. He thinks a conspiracy is afoot and convinces the crowd that perhaps the Oguros are responsible for all of this, and that they're the ones summoning the planet here. Meanwhile, the news shows footage of the planet Remina by Mars. We see a massive tongue protrude from the planet and engulf Mars. Hundreds of citizens have now formed a mob to try and hunt down and kill Remina and her father. Goda, Kunihiro, Mitsumura, and Remina all escape from the mob in a flying car. As they fly over the city, they see the mass mob of thousands of people as they erect 2 crucifixes, and in the sky, planet Remina comes into view. Moving into chapter 2, a team of astronauts are sent out to investigate the planet, which is now stopping just outside of Earth. As they move in close, they are shocked to find that the planet has a massive eye that turns its gaze towards their ship. Back on Earth, Remina and the crew are trying to decide what to do as they hide in Mitsumura's apartment. On TV, the news reporter is knocked out by some mysterious men in masks who have commandeered the station. They tell the viewers that there is only one way to stop the Earth from being destroyed, and that it is to eliminate the Oguros. Remina begins to cry, feeling bad that everyone is in danger because of her, but the boys say that they'll not leave her side and that they're in this together. Mitsumura says he'll protect her at all costs, and as the two share a moment, the other guys are clearly jealous, and Goda goes full simp on her. At this point, a mob's formed outside. I guess they tracked down the place knowing it was Remina's manager, and they're pounding on the door. The vice president of the fan club panics and starts trying to surrender on the balcony, only to be shot down. Everyone bolts, but they don't have many options as the car is surrounded by people outside. They decide to escape through the garbage chute, Star Wars style, and Mitsumura is kind of a badass, fighting 3 weapon-wielding dudes at once and taking them down before jumping down the chute. Back at the lab, Professor Oguro is talking to world leaders, trying to come up with a plan on how to stop the planet Remina. Why does this guy look like Dr. Evil from Austin Powers? Anyway, even the leaders start to question question whether Oguro summoned the planet here. The meeting is interrupted when they get a transmission from the team of astronauts. They send a video of Remina's surface and it looks like a nightmarish hellscape. We then see found footage from Captain Daisuke Kaneshi and one other survivor traveling on foot across the planet. They encounter what appear to be life forms on the planet waving at them before the footage cuts out. We also see that a crowd has formed outside of the observatory ready to kill the professor. Meanwhile, Remina and the gang are traveling through the sewers and manage to climb out of a manhole somewhere in the city. They look up to see the Hellstar has gotten even closer to Earth, and their escape attempt has failed as a mob surrounds them. The crowd moves in for the kill, and Kunihiro, a complete coward, tries to play it off like he's not with Remina before running away. Freaking rat. The crowd forces Remina to the ground and attempts to stab her, but Mitsumura boldly shields her, taking the knife in his own back. With tears streaming down her face, Remina confesses her love for Mitsumura, and as he bleeds out, he says he loves her too with his last breath. The man with the knife goes in again for the kill, but is stopped by the masked men from the TV. They say that killing Remina is a sacred act and must be done properly. Goto promises Remina he'll get them out of this and that he loves her more than anyone, although he's clearly salty that Remina said she loved Mitsumura. They're taken to the crucifixes that were erected earlier, and Remina sees that her father is already tied to one. On the final page of chapter 2, Professor Oguro is viciously stabbed to death on the cross. Remina is then hoisted onto the second cross, but before the girl can be killed, the planet Remina's giant eye appears from behind the clouds, and it almost seems like it's looking right at them. There's some really cool images here of the planet as its huge mouth appears and a giant tongue comes out. To everyone's shock, the Hellstar devours the moon. Then its massive tongue comes straight for Earth. However, missiles have been fired. They hit the planet's tongue and explode, causing debris to rain down from the sky, destroying much of the area. One explosion hits right by the mob, making a big distraction and giving Goto just enough time to save Remina from the crucifix. He carries her through the ruined city and gloats about how he saved her. She comes back to consciousness in despair, realizing her father and love are both dead. Goto starts simping again as they walk through the rain, saying stuff like, "You're a beautiful flower, just looking at you is enough. Yes, I must never do more than look." Okay, creepazoid. They run into Kunihiro and he tries to pretend like he just got lost and didn't intentionally run away. Goto knocks him to the ground and starts beating the snot out of him. Remina tells Goto to stop and says he's the worst for getting violent. Goto clearly takes this to heart and just walks away mumbling to himself. Kunihiro then drags a distraught Remina with him back to his house. His parents are pissed at him and can't believe he brought Remina here, considering they've been harassed by the mob just for the association. They say they have a secret government rocket that they're going to use to escape the planet. They took the astronauts' message as a sign that the planet Remina has an atmosphere and is habitable, so they plan to land there. Kunihiro begs his parents to bring Remina along as well, but they tell him no, so he grabs Remina and locks her in the secret bunker with him, and then starts making moves and tries to force himself on her. Luckily, the girl still has some fight left in her and gives him a good slap. The parents come in and ask what's going on, and Kunihiro, that absolute bastard, tells them that Remina tried to seduce him. His mom then starts slapping the hell out of her, and they lead her to the mansion gate to throw her out. When they open the gates, the mob is waiting for her, led by a man in a mask, and Kunihiro just shoves her outside the gate and locks it. The masked man calls her a witch and hits her with a whip, cutting her necklace off. She runs away, and it seems like the crowd give her a head start, like they've turned this into some kind of sport. So now the whole city is chasing Remina, and she doesn't have anyone to protect her. As the crowd gains on her, an earthquake hits, giving her a small chance to escape. She runs down an alley and finds a ramshackle hut to hide in, but as she enters, a hand reaches out and grabs her. It's a homeless man, and I guess this is his house. She begs the man to let her hide here, but before they continue the conversation, the masked man finds her. The homeless guy's like, "What are you assholes doing? I don't have anything to do with this." But the masked man accuses him of having sex with her, saying he needs to be executed. He actually fights back a bit, but ultimately the man and Remina are tortured and strung up by their arms from a tree. The man in the mask is just brutally beating Remina at this point, and it's really pretty messed up the horrors this girl has gone through, all because she shares the same name as the planet. The homeless man starts calling the mob maniacs and fools. One guy dismisses him, calling him a homeless tramp, and he has such a great reply, telling them that they'll all be homeless soon enough. After this, the mob just lays in on them both, beating them nearly to death. They see the shadow of the planet's tongue in the sky and decide they must kill Remina soon. They drag her back to the area her father died, and we see his roasted body still on the crucifix. These sick bastards tie Remina up on top of her father's dead body. Damn. They tie the homeless man up on the other side and start a fire at the bottom, hoping to burn them alive. At the same time, the giant tongue breaks through the clouds and crashes into the ground nearby. The eye of Remina watches as it takes a long lick across the earth. In the chaos, the masked man climbs up on the crucifix and starts licking Remina, mirroring the planet licking the earth. It's so weird. A tsunami then comes crashing through the city, knocking the masked man off the cross and submerging Remina and the homeless man into deep water. Meanwhile, Kunihiro and his family are launching into space, base on the secret ship, along with some other rich and important people. Remember way back when I mentioned that Kunihiro's oldest brother wanted to be an astronaut and his parents kicked him out? Well, his name was Daisuke, and Mr. Mineshi believes that the astronaut who landed on Remina, Daisuke Kaneshi, is actually his son who just changed his last name slightly. It seems now that being an astronaut wasn't the worst career choice, was it? Remina and the homeless man are barely surviving as the crucifix got stuck on the side of a building that is only partially submerged by the waves. Suddenly the sky turns dark and it looks like the stars are moving rapidly in the sky. The planet Remina shows its ugly multi-eyed face once again, and it seems the licking of Earth has caused it to spin. The two manage to escape from the cross, but at the same time, the masked man has kidnapped Remina, jumping away hundreds of feet in the air. I guess the gravity is all out of whack, and the masked man uses this as an opportunity to spin Remina around and slam her into the side of the building he's on. The homeless man jumps through the air, using the various floating objects to propel himself toward them. I like how he acknowledges that this is for sure the end of days, but he says he wants to beat the shit out of the masked guy first at least. He does get some good hits on the guy and manages to save Remina as well. They make their escape leaping from building to building, and the masked man starts yelling to anyone nearby, telling them Remina is over here. Next thing you know, there are dozens of people all flying through the air trying to kill Remina. This manga is so crazy, but I mean, come on, this is awesome. The wind keeps getting stronger and some of the pursuers are crashing into buildings and stuff. Eventually they run into the track that Remina's tongue left and get sucked into it. This thing is just a massive valley that goes on for thousands of miles. The chase now continues, and at this point everyone is basically just flying. Meanwhile, the Mineshi family lands on Remina's surface and finds that it is no paradise. It appears the crew and many of the passengers are dead and injured in the crash landing. Plus, they're unsure whether the air is actually breathable. Mr. Mineshi says they should take the helmet off one of the injured to see what happens. Man, this guy is a real piece of garbage. Well, they go ahead and do just that. Sure enough, the guy's head basically melts. Kind of reminds me of that scene from Total Recall. The family then freaks out, declaring that Remina is truly a demon planet and basically hell. Back on Earth, Remina regains consciousness and is shocked to find that they are flying fast around the Earth. The homeless man speculates that they are somewhere over Africa at this point. Remina is asking what all of us readers are thinking. How is this happening? And the man replies, it's just happening. We've got bigger fish to fry. Remina looks back to see that there are now thousands of people chasing after them. You know, that's a good way to read this manga. Don't question it too much. It's just happening. Anyway, that concludes chapter 5, and now on to the final chapter, which starts with people from all over the world out for the blood of Remina. The man asks Remina how it feels to have the whole Earth after her. Feeling bad that she dragged the man into all of this, Remina tells him to just let her go. He says the end result will be the same whether they catch him or keep running, and keeps hold of her. At this point, some of their pursuers are catching up. One guy attacks them with a pitchfork and another fires a gun at them, but the recoil causes him to get blown way back. Then a freaking flying car tries to run them over, but the wind is so strong it's thrown into the ocean. They end up back over what they believe to be Japan, with several of the region's volcanoes all going off, and the air is getting harder to breathe. At this point, the masked man finally catches them, and one of the biggest dog piles in history ensues. A massive ball of humans goes crashing to the Earth. Back on the planet Remina, it seems that the body that melted has fused with the surface and has now begun to resemble the planet itself. A giant tongue comes out and starts crushing the survivors. The Mineshi family runs, and the father straight up ditches his wife and son because they're too slow. He doesn't get too far though before he runs into his presumed son, Daisuke. However, another tongue bursts through the helmet as the surface comes alive and attacks the family. At the same time, we watch the planet's tongue reach for Earth once more. Somehow, the massive pile of bodies cushion the fall enough for Remina and the homeless man to survive. I guess they got really lucky. Anyway, they crawl out of a pool of blood and corpses and look up to see the Hellstar's tongue surrounding the planet. Another massive earthquake sends them flying, and it appears the man is crushed by a building. But next thing you know, he just casually picks up the building and throws it. I guess the gravity is still low. As they run, they end up finding a group of survivors in the wreckage, 2 adults and 2 kids. The homeless man says he has an idea and starts leading them all somewhere. As they approach a familiar building, Remina recognizes it as the Mineshi family's mansion. Somehow the man knows about the bunker there, and as planet Remina begins inhaling the Earth, the crew start filing into the mansion. At the last minute, Remina is grabbed by the masked man once more. He starts whipping Remina again, but in the process, he knocks his own mask off, revealing him to be Goda. That's right, Remina's #1 fan turned against her, all out of jealousy over Mitsumura, her true love. He tries to tell her he loves her once again, but is sucked up into the sky. As they make way for the bunker, we watch as the Earth is consumed by the demonic planet. Having devoured this entire solar system, Remina leaves to continue its galactic buffet. Remina wakes up to find herself safe in the bunker with the other survivors, now floating through space. The man explains that the bunker is meant to last for a year, giving them that at least. Remina puts 2 and 2 together and asks if with the homeless man was actually Daisuke Maneshi, and he reveals this to be true. He did leave his family 10 years ago, but never became an astronaut. In fact, he fell on hard times. So the astronaut Daisuke Kaneshi really was just some other guy with a similar name. The survivors are thankful for being saved, and the kids have fun playing in the zero gravity, but Daisuke explains that the tough times are only beginning, as they're now trapped in the endless void and the shelter is only good for a year. He laughs, saying maybe there'll be another miracle in a year, and joins in with the kids. In the final panel, Remina looks out into empty space, lamenting the loss of her father, and meets Amura. And that, my friends, is Hellstar Remina. Okay, that's all I got for you this week, and I'll be back next time with even more Junji Ito, so stay tuned. I want to say thanks to everyone for watching. If you like the intro and outro music that's likely playing right now, go check out Kill Me Katie. And of course, big shout out to my patrons. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.